The transport ship dropped out of hyperspace with a loud hum that made Jake's teeth hurt. He pressed his nose against the small window and watched the stars stop moving. Far away in the black space, a huge metal station floated like a city made of steel and glass. "There it is," his mother said from the seat next to him. Dr. Helen Carter had been reading work files on her tablet for most of the 3-day trip. "Research Station Alpha, our new home for 6 months." Jake let out a long breath and fell back in his seat. 6 months stuck on some boring space station while his friends back on Earth were having fun during summer break. He had wanted to stay with his father, but his parents got divorced 2 years ago. This summer was his mother's turn to have him. The station got bigger as their ship moved closer. Jake could see other ships docked around it. Some looked like the human ships he knew, but others were weird shapes he had never seen before. One ship looked like a giant metal flower. Another was round like a ball. A third ship seemed to be made of glowing blue crystal. "Are those alien ships?" Jake asked. His mother looked up from her tablet. "Yes. The Nexus project brings together smart people from many different alien races. You will see beings from all over the galaxy here." Jake had seen a few aliens on Earth before, but not many. Most alien races stayed on their own planets. The idea of living on a station with dozens of different alien species made him feel excited and scared at the same time. Their ship connected to the station with a soft bump. Jake grabbed his backpack and followed his mother through the connecting tunnel. The station hallway was wide and tall, built so that different-sized beings could walk through it easily. The walls were smooth white metal, and soft lights ran along the ceiling. "Dr. Carter?" A woman in a blue uniform walked up to them. She was tall with short red hair and looked about 30 years old. "I am Captain Lisa Morgan, Station Commander. Welcome to Research Station Alpha." "Thank you, Captain," Helen said, shaking her hand. "This is my son, Jake." Captain Morgan smiled at Jake. "Nice to meet you, Jake. I know this might seem boring to someone your age, but we have some amazing things here. Have you heard about the Nexus?" Jake shook his head. His mother had talked about her work, but he had not really listened. "The Nexus is why we are all here," Captain Morgan said as she led them down the hallway. 3,000 years ago, space explorers found it on a dead planet called Zerion Prime. It is something left behind by an ancient alien race called the Architects. They walked through several hallways filled with beings Jake had never seen before. A creature that looked like a walking tree nodded to them as they passed. 3 small blue beings with huge eyes were talking to each other in a language that sounded like music. A tall, thin alien with silver skin stood very still, like it was thinking hard about something. "The Architects controlled a quarter of the galaxy millions of years ago," Captain Morgan kept talking. "Then they disappeared. Nobody knows why. They left behind only one thing, the Nexus." They came to a big window that looked out into space. Below them, Jake could see a planet covered in red dirt and dead cities. But something else caught his eye. Floating in space between the station and the planet was a huge crystal structure. It was beautiful and scary at the same time. The crystal was clear like glass, but lights moved through it in patterns that hurt to look at. "That is the Nexus," Captain Morgan said. "It is 3 miles long and 1 mile wide. The crystal is harder than any material we know. We cannot break it, cut it, or damage it at all." Jake stared at the huge crystal. The lights inside it moved in slow, complicated patterns. Sometimes they flashed quickly, sometimes they moved, like slow rivers of light. "What does it do?" "That is what we are trying to figure out," Captain Morgan said. "Every alien race in the galaxy has sent their smartest people to study it. Math experts, engineers, scientists, mind readers. For 3,000 years, nobody has been able to figure out its secrets." Helen nodded. "The surface changes when different people work with it. When the Zephyrians work with it, the patterns become math problems. When the Corvin engineers study it, it shows technical drawings. When the Melody touch it with their mind powers, it creates pretty lights that do not mean anything. But it never opens," Captain Morgan added. "It never tells us its secrets. Some people think it holds all the knowledge of the Architects. Others think it might be a weapon. A few think it is just a piece of art. Jake watched the lights dance inside the crystal. They reminded him of something, but he could not remember what. Has anyone tried just talking to it? Captain Morgan and his mother looked at each other. Talking to it? Helen asked. Yeah. Like, what if it is not a puzzle to solve? What if it is trying to talk to people? The two women smiled the way grown-ups do when a kid says something cute but wrong. The galaxy's smartest people have been working on this for 3,000 years, Jake, his mother said gently. I think they have tried everything. But as Jake stared at the Nexus, he was not sure about that. The patterns in the crystal looked familiar somehow. They reminded him of something from his old video games, but he could not remember which one. Soft bell sound echoed through the hallway. Attention, a voice said over the station's speaker system. Today's research teams are starting their work with the Nexus. All viewing areas are now open. Would you like to watch? Captain Morgan asked Jake. Jake nodded, still staring at the crystal structure. As they walked toward the viewing area, he could not stop thinking that everyone was missing something simple. The lights in the Nexus were not random. They were not just reacting to the researchers, they were trying to say something. But what were they trying to say? Jake spent his first week on the station looking around every hallway and room he could find. The research station was huge. It had different sections built for different alien races. Some areas had heavier gravity for the big Corvin engineers. Others had special air for beings who breathed different gases. The best place was the main viewing deck. It had a clear glass dome that gave a perfect view of the Nexus floating in space. Jake found himself going there every day to watch the researchers work. He learned to tell the different alien races apart. The Zephyrians were tall and thin with blue skin and big heads. They always worked in groups of 3. They talked to each other using math problems. Jake could hear them through the speaker system when they flew close to the Nexus in their small research ships. The pattern shows prime numbers, one Zephyrian would say. Yes, but the 7th part breaks the pattern, another would answer. Maybe we need to try different math. The Corvin engineers were totally different. They looked like humans, but were much taller. They had gray skin and no hair. They studied the Nexus with machines and scanners, trying to understand how it was built. The crystal structure is impossible, Jake heard one Corvin say during their daily work. The pieces should not hold together at this size. Maybe the architects use science we do not know, his partner said back. All science follows the same rules. There must be something we are missing. The Melody were the strangest of all. They looked like floating jellyfish made of light. They could read minds and feelings. When they went near the Nexus, they did not use machines or math. They just floated close to it and tried to connect with their minds. Jake could not hear their thoughts, but he could see what happened on the Nexus. When the Melody worked, the crystal filled with beautiful colors that moved like music you could see. But like all the other tries, nothing came from it. Each alien race had been studying the Nexus for months or even years. Jake watched them do the same things every day. The Zephyrians would try new math ideas. The Corvins would test different scanning machines. The Melody would try different mental connections. Other races had their own ways, but Jake noticed something that seemed important. None of them paid attention to what happened after they failed. They would try their method, see that it did not work, then go back to their ships to plan something new. They never seemed to notice that the Nexus kept showing patterns even after they stopped working with it. On his 10th day on the station, Jake was sitting in the viewing deck eating lunch when he saw something that made him stop eating. A team of Zephyrian math experts had just finished working with the Nexus. Like always, their try had failed to unlock any secrets. They flew their ship back to the station, talking about new math problems to try tomorrow. But the Nexus did not go back to normal. The math patterns the Zephyrians had made were still there, but they were changing. The lights inside the crystal were moving the math symbols around, making new problems. Jake grabbed his notebook and started drawing what he saw. The Nexus was taking the Zephyrian math and doing something with it. It was like watching someone solve a puzzle, but Jake could not understand what the answer meant. An hour later, a team of Corvin engineers went to the Nexus. They ran their scans and tried to measure the crystal. When they finished and went back to the station, Jake watched carefully. Again, the Nexus kept working with their scans. changing the technical drawings they had made. Jake spent the rest of the day watching and taking notes. Every time a research team finished their work, the Nexus would keep going with what they had started. It was like the alien artifact was trying to finish conversations that the researchers had begun, but never completed. That evening, Jake found his mother in the station's small eating area. She was sitting with several other human researchers, talking about their own failed tries to understand the Nexus. "Mom," Jake said, sitting down at their table, "I think the Nexus is trying to talk back to the researchers." The adults at the table smiled politely. Dr. Rebecca Stone, a human language expert, leaned forward. "What do you mean, Jake?" "Well, when the Zephyrians show it math problems, it tries to solve them. When the Corvins scan it, it changes their drawings. But nobody stays around to see what it does after they leave." Helen Carter looked at her son with interest. "You have been watching the research work?" "Every day," Jake said. "And I think everyone is making the same mistake. They treat the Nexus like a locked box that needs the right key. But what if it is not a box? What if it is more like a person who wants to talk?" Dr. Stone shook her head. "Jake, the Nexus is a machine built by aliens who died millions of years ago. It cannot think or want things." "But what if it can?" Jake said. "What if the architects built it to talk with other races? Maybe it has been trying to talk to us for 3,000 years, but we keep walking away before the conversation gets started." The adults looked at each other. Jake could tell they thought he was just a kid, with a big imagination, but his mother looked thoughtful. "Jake," Helen said slowly, "even if you are right, how would we know what it is trying to say? The patterns it makes are very complicated." Jake pulled out his notebook and showed them his drawings. "Maybe they are not supposed to be complicated. Look at this pattern from yesterday when the melody worked with it." He showed them a drawing of swirling lights. To Jake, it looked like a simple question mark, but stretched out and made fancy. "What if it is asking questions back?" Jake said. "What if it wants to know about us the same way we want to know about it?" His mother stared at the notebook. "Jake, that is an interesting idea. But even if you are right, we would need permission to test it. And I am not sure anyone would let a 17-year-old boy try something that the galaxy's smartest people have not thought of." Jake looked out the eating area window at the Nexus floating in space. The lights inside it moved in their endless patterns, and he was more sure than ever that they were not random. They had a purpose. They were trying to talk. He just needed to find a way to talk back. Jake spent 3 more days watching the researchers and filling his notebook with drawings. He was sure the Nexus was trying to talk, but he needed proof. More than that, he needed someone to give him a chance to test his idea. The answer came from someone he did not expect. Lieutenant Amy Brooks was a young human officer who worked in the station's communication center. She was only 25 and had been given the job of watching all messages between the research teams and the Nexus. Jake had seen her around the station, and she always looked bored. On a Tuesday morning, Jake found Amy sitting alone in the small restroom staring at a cup of coffee. "Excuse me," Jake said, sitting down across from her. "You are Lieutenant Brooks, right?" Amy looked up, surprised. "Yes. You are Dr. Carter's son, Jake, right?" "That's me. Can I ask you something?" "Do you think all the research teams are crazy?" Amy laughed. "That's a strange question. Why would you ask that?" Jake opened his notebook and showed her his drawings. "I have been watching them work with the Nexus. They all do the same thing. They go to it, try their method, fail, and leave. But the Nexus keeps working after they go away. Look at these patterns." Amy looked at the drawings. She had a communication background, so she understood patterns and signals better than most people. "These are from different days, different alien races, different methods, but similar results," Jake explained. "The Nexus takes what they give it and tries to build on it, but nobody stays long enough to see what it builds." Amy looked through several pages of drawings. "Jake, these look like incomplete communication tries, like someone trying to make a connection but getting cut off every time." "Exactly," Jake said excitedly. "That's what I think too. But I need to test it, and nobody will listen to a 17-year-old kid." Amy was quiet for a long moment, looking at the patterns. Finally, she looked up at Jake. "What do you want to do?" "I want to try talking to it, not with fancy math or complicated scans, just simple communication, like teaching someone a new language." "That could be dangerous," Amy said. "The Nexus is very powerful. If you are wrong about what it wants, then we will know quickly and can stop," Jake replied. "But if I am right, we might finally get some answers." Amy looked at the drawings again. As a communications officer, she had seen every type of signal and message pattern. Jake's drawings looked like the beginning stages of first contact rules, the kind used when two races tried to talk for the first time. "I could give you access to a basic communication interface," Amy said slowly. "Nothing that could hurt the Nexus or put you in danger. But Jake, if anything goes wrong, we stop right away." "Deal," Jake said quickly. 2 hours later, Jake found himself in a small control room connected to the main communication system. Amy had set up a simple interface that would let Jake send basic signals to the Nexus. She had also made sure that several safety systems were in place to cut the connection if needed. "Remember," Amy said, "start simple. Basic math ideas, prime numbers, simple patterns. If the Nexus responds well, we can try more complex communication." Jake nodded and put his hands on the control interface. Through the window, he could see the Nexus floating in space, its internal lights moving in their endless patterns. "Here we go," Jake said, and sent the simplest signal he could think of. The number 1, repeated 3 times. The response was immediate. The lights in the Nexus pulsed once, twice, 3 times. Then they pulsed 4 times. "It's continuing the sequence," Amy said, excited. "Send something else." Jake sent a simple pattern. 2 pulses, pause, 2 pulses, pause, 2 pulses. The Nexus responded with 3 pulses, pause, 3 pulses, pause, 3 pulses. "It's learning," Jake said. "It understands that I am showing it patterns and it is showing me the next step." For the next hour, Jake and the Nexus exchanged more and more complex patterns. But Jake noticed something important. Every time he sent a pattern, the Nexus would not only respond with the next logical step, but it would also send back something new. A question. "Amy, look at this," Jake said, pointing to the display showing the Nexus's signals. After each response, it sends something else. "I think it is asking me questions." Amy looked at the readouts. "What kind of questions?" Jake thought for a moment. The additional signals were always different, but they had a similar feel to them. Like someone asking, "What about this?" or "Can you do this?" "I think it wants to know about me," Jake said. "Not just math or patterns, it wants to know about humans." Jake decided to try something completely different. Instead of sending math sequences, he sent something personal. He used the interface to create a simple pattern that showed his age, 17 pulses. The Nexus responded right away, but not with 18 pulses as Jake expected. Instead, it sent back a complex series of signals that seemed to show something much larger, much older. "I think it just told me how old it is," Jake said quietly. "How old?" Amy asked. Jake looked at the pattern. "If I am reading this right, millions of years. It has been waiting for millions of years." "Waiting for what?" Before Jake could answer, the Nexus sent another signal. This one was different from all the others. It was not a math pattern or a simple response. It was complex and layered, like a sentence with multiple meanings. Jake stared at the display, trying to understand what the Nexus was telling him. Suddenly, the meaning became clear. "Amy," Jake said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I think it just asked me why I'm different from all the others." "Different how?" "All the other researchers treat it like a thing to be studied, but I am treating it like someone to talk to. It knows the difference." Amy looked at the communication log scrolling across her screen. "Jake, the Nexus has been sending signals for the past hour that I have never seen before. Complex signals. It is definitely responding to your method differently than it has to anyone else." Jake felt a mix of excitement and fear. He had been right about the Nexus trying to communicate. But now he realized that the ancient alien artifact was much more than just a communication device. It was smart. It was aware. And it had been alone for millions of years, waiting for someone who would treat it as an equal rather than an object to be studied. "What do I do now?" Jake asked. Before Amy could answer, alarms began sounding throughout the station. The communication interface shut down by itself and the connection to the Nexus was cut. "What's happening?" Jake asked. Amy was checking her emergency systems. "The Nexus energy readings just went beyond anything we have ever recorded. Every research team on the station is being called back right away." Through the window, Jake could see the Nexus pulsing with bright light. For the first time in 3,000 years, something had changed. The ancient alien puzzle that no one could crack was finally waking up. And it was waking up because a human teenager had done something no one else had thought to try. He had treated it like a friend instead of a mystery to be solved. The station shook as waves of energy came from the Nexus. Jake pressed himself against the window, watching the huge crystal structure change before his eyes. What had been clear crystal was now filled with bright light that moved like liquid, fire. Patterns raced across its surface faster than Jake could follow. "All research teams return to the station right now," Captain Morgan's voice echoed through the speaker system. "This is not a drill. The Nexus is showing activity we have never seen before." Amy was quickly checking her machines. "Jake, the energy readings are off the charts. The Nexus is pulling power from somewhere, but we cannot tell where." Through the hallways, Jake could hear the sounds of panic. Alien voices speaking in languages he did not understand. Footsteps running in all directions. Emergency lights were flashing red throughout the station. "Did I break it?" Jake asked, fear creeping into his voice. "I do not think you broke it," Amy replied, staring at her screens. "I think you woke it up." The communication interface suddenly came back online by itself. Signals began streaming across Amy's displays, but these were unlike anything they had seen before. The patterns were more complex than anything the galaxy's smartest people had recorded in 3,000 years of study. "It is trying to communicate," Jake said, moving back to the interface. "It wants to finish our conversation." "Jake, no," Amy said, reaching for the emergency shutdown. "This is too dangerous. We do not know what is happening." But before she could cut the connection, new patterns appeared on the screen. These were simpler, easier to understand. Jake recognized them right away. "Wait," he said. "These are the same patterns I sent to it an hour ago. It is reminding me of our conversation. It is trying to tell me not to be afraid." Amy stopped, her hand hovering over the shutdown controls. The patterns on the screen were indeed the same math sequences Jake had used to first communicate with the Nexus. But now they were part of something bigger, more complex. "Look at this," Jake said, pointing to the display. "It is showing me our entire conversation, but it is adding new information to each part." The Nexus was taking each simple pattern Jake had sent and expanding it into something much more detailed. The number sequences became star maps. The age pattern Jake had sent became a timeline stretching back millions of years. And the question about why Jake was different became a flood of information about other races who had tried to communicate with the Nexus over the centuries. "Amy, it is teaching me," Jake said in amazement. "It is showing me everything." The door to the communication room burst open. Jake's mother rushed in, followed by Captain Morgan and several alien researchers. The Zephyrian team leader, Dr. Vex 9, floated behind them, his large eyes fixed on the displays. "What did you do?" Helen Carter demanded, looking at her son, and then at the energy readings. "I talked to it, Mom," Jake said simply. And it talked back. Dr. Vex 9 moved closer to the displays, studying the patterns flowing across the screens. "These math relationships are beyond our understanding. The complexity is unlike anything we have recorded." "That is because you have been asking it the wrong questions," Jake said. "You all treat the Nexus like a computer or a database, but it is not a machine. It is alive." "Impossible," said Dr. Corvin Prime, the lead engineer. "Our scans show no biological parts." "Not alive like us," Jake explained, "but aware, thinking. It has been conscious for millions of years, waiting for someone to notice. The patterns on the screen shifted, becoming a three-dimensional map of the galaxy. Thousands of star systems were highlighted, connected by lines of light. Jake could see Earth among them, along with the home worlds of every race represented on the station. "It is showing us the architect civilization," Captain Morgan said in awe. "All their worlds, their trade routes, their entire empire." But the map began to change. The connecting lines started disappearing. Worlds went dark one by one. Jake watched as the vast architect empire slowly collapsed until only a few scattered systems remained. Then those too went dark, leaving nothing but empty space. "What happened to them?" Jake asked. The Nexus responded by showing him the display filled with images of space, but not empty space. Something was moving through the darkness between stars. Things that looked like shadows with teeth eating everything they touched. Wherever these shadow creatures went, stars died and civilizations vanished. "The Devourers," whispered Dr. Melody Song, the lead mind reader. "We have heard legends of such beings, but we thought they were myths." The Nexus showed more images. The architects had discovered these shadow creatures approaching their territory. They had tried to fight, but normal weapons and technology were useless. The Devourers fed on advanced civilizations, growing stronger with each world they consumed. "So the architects disappeared to avoid being eaten?" Jake asked. The display changed again, showing Jake something incredible. The architects had not died or run away. They had found a way to leave their physical bodies behind and exist as pure consciousness. They had transcended to a higher plane of existence where the Devourers could not reach them. "But why did they leave the Nexus behind?" Helen asked. The answer came as a flood of new images and information. The Nexus was not just a communication device or a storage of knowledge. It was a test and a gift combined into one. The architects had left it behind to find other races capable of the same transcendence they had achieved. But transcendence required something specific. It was not enough to be smart or technologically advanced. The Devourers actually targeted the most advanced civilizations first, using their own knowledge and technology against them. To transcend, a race needed something different. They needed the ability to think beyond logic and technology. They needed creativity, empathy, and the wisdom to see patterns that pure intelligence missed. "The test," Jake said, understanding flooding through him. The Nexus was testing for something the architects called the bridge mind, a way of thinking that could connect different forms of consciousness. The display showed Jake images of all the races that had tried to unlock the Nexus over the past 3,000 years. Brilliant mathematicians, master engineers, powerful mind readers, all had failed because they approached the Nexus with the same type of thinking that made them vulnerable to the Devourers. "But humans are different," Jake continued, the pieces falling into place. "We balance logic with intuition. We can be scientific but also creative. We solve problems not just with our minds but with our hearts." The Nexus pulsed with warm light, confirming Jake's understanding. Then it showed him something that made his blood run cold. The shadow creatures, the Devourers, were not just legends from the past. They were real, and they were coming. The display showed space beyond the galaxy's edge, where something vast and hungry was moving toward them. The Devourers had spent millions of years consuming other galaxies, and now they were approaching this one. They would arrive in about 200 years. "We have to warn everyone," Captain Morgan said, staring at the approaching darkness. But the Nexus was not finished. It showed Jake two possible futures. In the first, the galaxy's civilizations would try to fight the Devourers with normal weapons and technology. They would fail, just as the architects had failed, and be consumed one by one. In the second future, the galaxy's races would learn to transcend as the architects had done. But transcendence required a guide, someone who could help them develop the bridge mind that made it possible. The Nexus focused its attention on Jake, and suddenly he understood why it had responded to him when it had ignored everyone else. Humans were not the smartest race in the galaxy, or the most advanced. But they had something rare, the natural ability to bridge different ways of thinking and communicating. The architects had waited millions of years for a race like humanity to evolve and find the nexus. They had left behind their greatest creation not as a museum piece but as a school, a place where Jake could learn to help other races develop the bridge mind they would need to survive what was coming. "The choice is mine?" Jake asked the nexus. The ancient alien artifact pulsed once in response. "Yes." Jake looked around the room, at all the adults staring at him. His mother, the captain, the alien researchers who had spent years trying to understand what he had unlocked in a single conversation. They were all waiting for him to decide not just his own future, but the future of every civilization in the galaxy. The weight of that choice pressed down on him like a mountain. But Jake also felt something else, the warm presence of the Nexus. No longer alien and mysterious, but like an old friend offering to help him carry the burden. He was 17 years old, and he was about to make the most important decision in galactic history. Jake stood in silence for a long moment, feeling the weight of every pair of eyes in the room. The Nexus waited patiently, its lights pulsing gently like a heartbeat. Through the window, he could see research ships from every major race in the galaxy heading toward the station. Word was spreading quickly about what had happened. "What exactly are you asking me to choose?" Jake said to the Nexus. The display changed, showing him two clear paths. In the first image, Jake saw himself stepping into a beam of light that would connect him directly to the architect realm. He would gain incredible knowledge and power, becoming something beyond human, but he would also leave his physical body behind forever, joining the architects in their transcendent existence. The second image showed Jake remaining human, but becoming a teacher. The Nexus would give him the knowledge he needed to help other races develop the bridge mind. It would be a slower path, taking generations to prepare the galaxy for transcendence, but it would allow every race to make the choice for themselves when the time came. "I would become like the architects?" Jake asked. The Nexus showed him images of what that would mean. He would exist as pure consciousness, able to travel instantly across the galaxy to see and understand things that physical beings could never comprehend. He would have access to millions of years of architect knowledge and wisdom, but he would also be alone. The architects existed in a realm that physical beings could not reach. If Jake chose transcendence now, he would have to leave everyone he cared about behind. His mother, Amy, his friends back on Earth. He would become something wonderful and terrible and completely separate from the life he had known. "And if I stay human?" Jake asked. The second path was harder but different. Jake would remain himself, but he would carry the responsibility of preparing the galaxy for what was coming. The Nexus would become his partner, teaching him how to help other races develop the bridge mind they would need to survive the Devourers. Some races would choose transcendence when the time came. Others might find different ways to survive. But they would all have the choice, and they would all have the knowledge they needed to make it. Dr. Vex 9 floated closer to the displays. "What is this bridge mind the Nexus speaks of?" Jake looked at the alien mathematician. "It is the ability to think in ways that connect different forms of consciousness. Like how I was able to communicate with the Nexus when your math could not, or how the Nexus could understand me when it could not understand your engineering. But humans are not superior to other races," Dr. Corvin Prime said. "Our technology is far more advanced than yours." "That is exactly the point," Jake replied. "The Devourers feed on advanced technology and complex knowledge. The more sophisticated a civilization becomes, the easier it is for them to consume. But the bridge mind is not about being smart or advanced. It is about being flexible, about seeing connections that logic alone cannot find." Captain Morgan stepped forward. "Jake, this is an enormous responsibility. You are only 17 years old." Jake looked around the room at all the adult faces staring at him. A few weeks ago, he had been just a bored teenager who wanted to go home. Now he was being asked to guide the entire galaxy through the greatest crisis in its history. "I know," Jake said quietly. "But the Nexus chose me for a reason. Humans have something the other races need to learn. We balance logic with intuition. We can be scientific but also creative. We solve problems not just with our minds, but with our understanding of others. The nexus pulsed with warm light, encouraging him to continue. The architects were brilliant, Jake said, but they were all similar to each other. When they faced the devourers, they only had one way of thinking to draw from. The galaxy now has dozens of races with different ways of seeing the universe. If we can learn to combine all those different perspectives, we might find solutions the architects never imagined. Jake's mother moved closer to him. What would this mean for you, Jake, for your life? Jake asked the Nexus to show him what his life would be like if he chose to remain human and become a teacher. The display filled with images of the future. He saw himself working with researchers from every race, helping them understand the bridge mind. He saw new technologies that combined different forms of thinking. He saw races learning to communicate and cooperate in ways they never had before. It would not be an easy life. He would spend decades traveling between worlds, teaching and learning. He would face doubt from those who believed their own ways of thinking were superior. He would carry the constant weight of knowing about the approaching threat, but it would also be a life filled with discovery and connection. He would help create something new in the galaxy. A true partnership between races based on understanding, rather than competition. And when the Devourers finally arrived, the galaxy would be ready with solutions no single race could have developed alone. I want to stay human, Jake said finally. I want to help everyone learn what the Nexus taught me. The ancient alien artifact pulsed with joy. The lights inside it began to reorganize themselves into new patterns. Jake could feel knowledge flowing into his mind, but gently, at a pace he could handle. The Nexus was not just giving him information, it was teaching him how to learn and how to help others learn. The Nexus will remain here, Jake explained to the others, but it will also create smaller versions of itself, teaching devices that can travel to different worlds and help each race develop their own version of the bridge mind. Over the following weeks, the transformation began. News of the Nexus breakthrough spread across the galaxy. Representatives from hundreds of races came to the research station to learn what Jake had discovered. At first, many were doubtful. How could a teenage human succeed where their greatest minds had failed? But as Jake demonstrated the communication techniques he had learned, and as the Nexus began creating teaching devices for each race, the doubt turned to excitement. The Zephyrians learned to balance their mathematical logic with intuitive leaps. The Corvins discovered how to combine their engineering precision with creative problem-solving. The Melody found ways to use their mind abilities to bridge gaps between different forms of consciousness. Each race developed their own version of the bridge mind, suited to their unique ways of thinking. But they all shared the same core ability, the capacity to see beyond their own perspectives and find connections with other forms of consciousness. Jake split his time between the research station and traveling to different worlds. Everywhere he went, he found races eager to learn but also eager to teach. The galaxy was becoming something it had never been before, a true community of minds working together. The threat of the Devourers was still centuries away, but the galaxy was no longer defenseless. They were developing not just new technologies but new ways of thinking that could adapt to any challenge. Some races would eventually choose transcendence, others would find ways to hide or fight, still others would discover solutions that no one had yet imagined. But they would all face the future together, guided by the wisdom of a 17-year-old human who had done something no one else in the galaxy had thought to try. He had treated an ancient alien puzzle not as a problem to be solved, but as a friend who wanted to help. As Jake stood on the observation deck months later, watching the Nexus train a new group of researchers, he smiled. The ancient alien artifact was no longer mysterious or threatening. It was exactly what it had always been, a teacher waiting patiently for students who were ready to learn. The galaxy had a long road ahead, but for the first time in millions of years, it was not walking that road alone.